It's a pleasure to kick this off, and I was trying to think of the best way to talk about where we are right now with water. And one of the things in my career is that 39 years ago right now, and believe me, it's hard to believe that that's how long it's been since I was a college student or a university student. I wrote my undergraduate thesis on the history of water development in California. And I'm very carefully embargoing that. But the thing about it is that I've never been far away from water in the time since. But if you look at where we were then and where we are now, there have been these fundamental changes in thinking, in the issues, in sort of how the table is set for water issues in California. Because at that time, it was about 10 years after the bonds were approved by the voters to establish the California Water Project, and yet it wasn't fully in place. It was really a little later that decade that happened. There was no CEQA, there was no Endangered Species Act. It wasn't until sometime, I think in the late 80s, that the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California changed their view about underground storage. They were very skeptical. They didn't believe in it. It was a pitch fight. And interestingly, when a water Armageddon sort of happened 3 or 4 years ago, where the Colorado River was in the 8th year of drought, there was 28% of normal rainfall in the LA basin. A judge turned off the pumps from the Delta. It was that investment that saved them in many ways with 1.5 million acre-feet underground. When I wrote my thesis, the operating political coalition in California was really Central Valley Ag and urban Southern California. That's what drove water politics. And the land patterns in some places were very big. If you look at 3 maps of the Westlands Water District, there were originally 3 large landowners. People have it stuck in their minds that's the way the land patterns were, and yet when the federal government did reforms about 25 years ago that allowed subsidized water only up to something like 1,060 acres or somewhere in that thing, even though some of them are brothers-in-laws or arm's-length family members, the land patterns changed in a way that it was more diverse in that area. And in conservation, which Rita mentioned, even when I first got to the state legislature, conservation was viewed by many people in the water world as the excuse some people had for not supporting dams. They weren't really for conservation, but it was the way of having some affirmative position. And that has fundamentally changed. And you look at the city of Los Angeles, which has grown by 1 million people in the last generation, all on the same amount of water. So they have had their fundamental shift where conservation and efficiency is what has allowed for their growth in the last few decades. And that's true in the broader Southern California region. So all those things have changed. The political coalition that governed has realigned in some different ways, and it led to the water agreement in 2009. And one of the, in the last session, one of the reasons that people are starting to move on water is not all these fundamental changes in thinking, but the fact that if you look at the Delta, which is the hub of California water, something like 2/3 of Californians get their water where it originates in the Sierra, and most of them get it just before it flows into the Delta or after it flows through the Delta, the same 2/3. And the status quo is finally to the point that it is an unacceptable project alternative. That if nothing is done for Delta restoration, it will in essence be an inland Salton Sea by the end of the century. If climate change is truly the way some people projected, and the Sierra snowpack by the end of the century is roughly half of what it is now, and that's where 2/3 of Californians get their water. We better be thinking differently about at least how you operate the current system, much less whether the current system provides water in the right places to the right people. And if the delta crashes, or frankly, when there's a major earthquake, there could be as long as a 3-year interruption of water supply out of the delta. In a normal year, that's 50% of the water to the Silicon Valley, an incredible worldwide economic engine. If that's in a drought time, that's roughly 90% of the water that might be coming into the Silicon Valley. And so you just look at everything that is the way we are right now, and I think there's not a person across the water spectrum that doesn't understand we have to fundamentally make major decisions and plan for our future in a different way than the system has been set up now. And so that puts you right where we are. And the governor campaigned in the election on support of the dual goals that were part of the legislative package. And what the legislative package did, it did a lot of things, but one of the more significant things is it enshrined into law the fact that there are co-equal dual goals for going forward in water planning, and that is habitat restoration and operating the delta scientifically. And the second one is water reliability, determining what reliably can be taken from the delta to serve the people that receive water from it. And when it's said that they're co-equal, it really means that you can't have one without the other. And I've had a lot of fun speaking to different groups of stakeholders, basically saying everybody is firmly committed to one of those goals. And everybody has to get used to the fact that to achieve the one goal they're firmly committed to, they have to believe in the second goal, and that has to be achieved at the same time. If we can operate the delta scientifically, meaning certain times there's the right flows for fish, certain times there's the right flows for the temperature of the water for the fish, that we figure out how to protect against seawater intrusion from the estuary into San Francisco Bay. We do the things that we need to do to deal with the delta, then we can determine a reliable water amount. And then, is there a discussion of conveyance or a cross-delta facility, because we have achieved the first goal, to get to the second goal and then have that discussion. I spoke to a statewide ag group a couple of weeks ago, and they sent to me beforehand, they said, here are the questions we'd like you to answer. And I'm going to exaggerate a little, but it was basically the way I read the questions. It was like, well, there's certain people that if you enact the flows they want through the delta, you can't take a drop of water for use by a water thing. What do you think? And basically, how are we going to pay for this? And can we have a big pipe in conveyance coming across the delta? And I gave them a similar introduction that I've just given you, and said that basically we have to work from that direction there. And then the answers to all your questions are evident. And if somebody wants to talk to me about a pipe, yes, we'll take the scientific studies as part of determining the science to know soil samples, where it might go, so that the scientific work or the engineering prep work is done to answer questions when we answer all the questions together. But it's premature to have those discussions, because it might be any of a number of ways sequentially that when you determine what the delta needs, it tells you when there might be flows. And if the flows are such that you can take water in a relatively even manner a significant amount of time of the year, then a big pipe is not necessarily necessary. if it turns out that you can only take